Goed. U ziet een mooi panel zitten. Van allemaal mensen die al eerder iets gezegd hebben. Volgens mij 1 persoon nog niet. En die wil ik wel even aangeven wie dat is. En dat is Vinier Habel. Die schrijver van het grootwoordenboek van het Saramakaanse taal. En werkt momenteel aan een cursusboek Sranantongo. Hij is voorzitter van de Tianga Vriendenkring Samaka Museum. Dus hij zit erbij als enige. De rest van de mensen hebben we al voorgesteld. Ik geef nu een stokje over aan Alex. Er zijn wat vragen verzameld die Alex straks zal voorleggen aan het mooi panel hier. Maar er is ook de mogelijkheid, en dat zal Alex ook gebruik van maken, vragen die zijn blijven liggen of mensen die graag nu een bepaalde vraag willen hebben, zoals die mevrouw daar, dan mag dat ook gesteld worden. Dus niemand gaat naar buiten zonder een vraag te stellen die graag had gewild. Ja, zullen we dat zo afspreken? Alex, ik geef het woord aan jou.
Dat laatste zou ik niet heel hard durven beloven. Dat niemand... Nee, er zullen vast wel vragen blijven. De formule is als volgt. Van tevoren zijn dus een aantal vragen van de groep hier bij mij terechtgekomen. Daar heb ik een soort opbouw van gemaakt. En het is in het Engels, want het is dus een interview met Richard en Sally Price, onze guests of honor vandaag. Dus ik vraag het in het Engels. Als er iets niet duidelijk is, roep het, dan wordt het vertaald. En als je een vraag mocht hebben in het Nederlands, dan vertaal ik het wel in het Engels. Dus we gaan een beetje, eerst een rondje hier en dan gaan we even naar de zaal. En dan is het zo 5:15 en dan moeten we echt eruit. Right. So, dear Sally, dear Richard, welcome again in this, well, it's almost a show, isn't it? So I would like to start with a very light question. And that is that people who know you know that you didn't start your field work with the Marrons. You started in Martinique, in Spain, in Mexico, and it was only after those... Sorry? Peru, all right. Only after those studies that you decided to go to Suriname and do your research among Marrons. Who was the one who chose for Suriname?
He's older than I am.
And you have to be old to choose for...
He was ready to work on his dissertation, his PhD dissertation, while I was just graduating from college. Okay, I mean, I was
right
behind. He was the one.
All right, but of course the main question is why Suriname?
I wanted to study the history of and the anthropology of Africans who were enslaved and sent to the Americas from Argentina to Canada. I wanted to study the whole African diaspora. And as I learned about it and read about it for a couple of years, I saw that it was in Suriname and among Marrons where people had had the chance to develop their societies, language, culture, religion, the most independently from European masters. So if you made one of our predecessors, who actually was in Saamaka in 1928 and 29, Melville Herskovits and his wife Frances, made a kind of a chart. It was sort of silly, but he made it in the 1930s, in which he said there's a continuum, and the Suriname Marrons are at one end, and then he put peoples from all over the Americas, black peoples, descendants of Africans, and at the other end were black Americans in Harlem. And he said that's the continuum. People who are very assimilated culturally the farthest from Africa. And then you go all the way to the Marrons of Suriname, who have been able to develop their own societies and cultures with very little European influence. So, in those days, anthropologists liked studying exotic peoples. They wanted to go to the farthest place possible from, civilization and so on. So, and we also had seen pictures made mostly in the books of Jean Hureau, the French geographer who studied the Aluku in the 1950s. And there were very heroic pictures of men in canoes and women in their rice gardens and so on. And we said, that's where we want to go. So it was a time when the Dutch were just beginning to study Suriname because, why? They lost Indonesia. Lost. The Dutch anthropologists were no longer welcome in Indonesia suddenly. So in 1960 or 61, André Koebe from the University of Amsterdam stopped studying Africa and he went to Suriname. And he took with him Bano Toden van Velsen and Ineke van Wetering, the couple. And they went to the Tapanahoni. He was on the Kotika. And we got in touch with them, and they said, well, you can study the Samaka. No one has been there for a very long time. And we went to Suriname and tried to get permission to go to the Samakas. And it was very bureaucratically, it was a colony, of course, at the time. And finally, Districtscommissaris Michels said to us, okay, you can study the Samaka, you can go live with them, but you can't go near where the dam is. You can't go near Afobaka because there's a lot of trouble there now because we forced 6,000 people to move. So we said, okay, we'll go far away. And we went to the Piquilio. And eventually we got permission and so on. And Sally and I have just written a book. It's our newest book. It's called Samaka Dreaming. And it's about all of this. It's about our being in Samaka in the 1960s, 1966, 67, 68. So it's about what Samaka life was like on the Piquilio and elsewhere in the 1960s. Which is very different from life in those villages today. Yeah, sure.
Shall I add something?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Just to mention that when we arrived in Suriname for that field work, we had read lots of things about Marrons, heard lots of things about Marrons, but I must say they were all authored by men. The visitors to Maroon villages were men, and they talked to men. And so there was very little known. Ineke van Wetering, who was doing field work with her husband, Bano Toden van Velsen, hadn't yet published her findings. And so there was a twist in the possible vision of what Maroon life was like that simply had to do with that very simple fact.
Right, yeah. Well, that makes immediately a small bridge to the next question, which is you both work together, you have worked together, you have produced books by the dozen together. Still, you both have your own field, and your field is, among others, art and gender. I mean, your book on co-wives and calabashes is still it's a classic in its own sort, and I think it's very important because you have such a long experience studying at least Samaka, but Marrons in general. What you think are the main changes over time in the life of Maroon women, in maybe also the relation to art. So I think we would be very grateful if you could expand a little bit on that.
Well, as you know, gender relations between men and women are not simple. They're complicated, they have many different aspects to them, and they're not static through time. They change over time a great deal. The early images of Maroon society had a problem with language in that people understood that these were matrilineal societies, that is, that kinship was traced through the female line. But many people made sort of flipped that term and said, therefore, they're matriarchal. In other words, it's the women who have the positions of strength and power and so on, which, if you think about it, if women had had the dominant power in these societies from the beginning, you probably wouldn't have a polygynous society. You wouldn't have a society where men had multiple wives. In any case, so that was a misconception early on. As for, how to simplify this enough? I would just like to say that one of the things that has pleased me the most about this gathering today was the presence of women, which when we began working with Saramacas probably wouldn't have been quite as evident. I mean, today was the first time that I met a Hedi Kapiteni, who is a woman. The presentation by women is a sign that things have really changed a great deal. In some cases, it's a trade-off between things that women's lives as they were in the mid-20th century and as they are today. Take, for example, the idea that today women in French Guiana who live often in apartments or in houses that are very unlike those in the old villages, they have washing machines, and that's a wonderful thing. On the other hand, they don't have the setting that they had in the interior of Suriname, where they would go down to the river, and it was a social encounter where they got caught up on gossip and they found out what was going on and so on, and they had a relationship among women that was very important. And if you have a washing machine, you don't have much of a relationship with it. So,
although more time on the mobile.
I mean, the arrival of telephones has been as much a gigantic change for women as for men. That's on both sides. Yeah, it's okay. At the point when we talk about art, then there'll be more to say. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to add that when we lived in Dangogo and Piquinho in the 1960s, most women had been outside of Saramacca territory to the city, to Foto, only once in their life for 2 or 3 days, when their father or their mother's brother took them to see Foto, so that they could see what a horse looked like or a car. And then the rest of their life, they never went. So we knew women in their 70s and 80s who had been to the city, in 1920 and once for a few days. And women were not allowed to go to the city. They weren't allowed to accompany their husbands because it's a patriarchal society, let's face it. The Bey did not let women accompany their husbands, for instance, to Kuhu. Half of the men in the 1960s, half of the men in the Piquilio were in French Guiana, in Kuhu, building the city and the base. That's where the work was then. After it had been on Afobaka, it went to Kuhu. But the men were there alone, without women. Their wives stayed at home, and they sent them cassette tapes whenever men went back and forth, they would bring 10 cassettes with messages from men to their wives and so forth. And the men would stay 3 years, 2 years, 4 years, and then come back for 3 or 4 years, and then go back again. But women were in the village, and then suddenly, or slowly in the 1970s, and certainly by the 80s, that changed completely. So today, women come to Kuhu alone from Saramaka villages, and it's very, very different. So women are much more independent than they
Richard?
were.
Yeah, Sally wants the mic back.
We could spend this whole time
Right.
on these changes. Another really big change is school. When we lived in Saramaka, school was just kind of beginning in Jumu, at the mission base, and some of the young boys went, but girls did not. Girls did not go to school. They stayed at home. And as Rich was saying earlier today, some of our shining examples of success in the Maroon population in French Guiana are women. The doctor who's studying epidemiology in France is a woman. The woman we met who's at Sciences Po, just a top-ranking school in France, is a woman. After we gave talks a couple of years ago in a high school in Saint Laurent, I started getting emails from 2 students who had questions they wanted to ask me. They said they were doing a report on what life was like in Saramaka, and they said they didn't really know, so could I please tell them? Women are they're assuming an active role and school is a very major part of that.
I remember Akutu at Gama Konde when Gama Agbago Aboikoni came back from the Netherlands, where he had come to have some treatment for his knees, which were he was having a problem with it walking, and when he came back, there was a big kutu about the school, which was new, the school in Jumu, which was for all the villages, Langu, all the way down to Semoisi and so on, and all of the Pikiliu. And I remember the Gama arguing that he thought girls should be allowed to go to school. And every kapiteni, including the 2 kapiteni from Dangogo, said no. Head Kapiteni Francisonu said, well, you may think that is Gama, but we captains don't think school is for women. The Gama said, I remember very well, he said, I was in the hospital, I don't remember, in Utrecht, I think, somehow in Den Haag, and he said, the doctors taking care of me were women. He said, I was very impressed by that, so I think girls should go to school. But the other captain said, no, not yet, no.
They didn't say not yet.
Well, they said no. They just said no. We think girls have another function, not to go to school. Why would school help them?
All right.
So that was a debate then.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Things have changed.
Things have changed, yeah. And well, one of the things and one of the questions that came up in this group was that when you started in Dangogo, Gama Agbago was at his heyday, so to speak.
Yeah.
He had started in 1951, and he was the successor of Gama Janguso.
Well, Atudendo was in between.
Atudendo was in between, right? But when he started, it was after a sort of battle with another person who wanted to be Gama, I think. At least I got the question that there was some competition as there is now and as there has been so many times. Maybe I'm wrong or the question is wrong, but there has been so many competition and struggle and battle in the succession of Gamas in every Maroon people. So And we're in the middle of that now in the Samaka situation. So the question could be, is there something wrong in the system of succession? Is it a system which doesn't work anymore? Sorry.
No, that was he's going to answer it, but I was just thinking that there's something wrong in the United States too in succession.
Yeah.
When Agama dies in Samaka, is in the other people, there is very frequently competition for who he should succeed. And different law normally fight about it based on Fécité history. What's unusual about what's happening now and what happened with Ochuchu, Bérifond, also after Songo's death, is that the Machao law has two different Bey that are fighting each other. The Machaos have put two different Gama in and said, they waited de futu. They've done the rituals to make them both Gamas, and then the people lower down the river put in a completely different Gama. So that's the first time that that's ever happened in Samaka. I don't know what else to say about it. You know, for a while, there were two Gamas in Aluku.
I know.
Both recognized and so forth. For the moment, the Jukas feel very superior because the succession that they had several years ago worked quite smoothly. And as I see it, the Paramaribo government is very pleased with the fact that the Samakas are having this fight, and they may even be helping it stay that way because it makes the Samakas powerless compared to the way they are when they have a Gama. The government can do what it wants in terms of mining and all the things that Ugo talks about.
Sally, would you like to add or? No, all right. No, because you were looking at me. Okay, one more question before I go to the audience. One of our friends in our group stated that according to him, Marrons in Suriname are still living in a mode of survival. And someone else pointed at your latest book, which is here. I recommend it highly. It's really good stuff to read. On page 17, you say in the book, you quote actually Kala saying, and I quote now, "The war we fought is not over yet. The war we fought is not over yet. We're still fighting, we're still struggling. And the greatest fear of all Marrons is that those times, which is slavery, and the struggle for freedom shall come again." So we still fear being enslaved again. And that's making Marrons living still in a mode of survival instead of, I guess, the idea was just live. And on the other hand, you might also say that mode of survival and that fear is a binding force, because in surviving together, you have a goal and you fight against something. But do you agree with this idea of Marrons living in a mode of survival and living in a sort of constant fear?
These were older people in the 1960s and 70s, some of whom were very fierce and some of whom would not shake hands with a white person, a baka, black or white. And they were the way Samakas used to be. They were people who knew about Fécité and cared about those kinds of things. Today, it's completely different. I mean, if people are trying to survive, they're, hustling or something, the way people do in Paramaribo. The mindset of those older men in the 1960s and 70s, I think pretty much completely gone. I mean, Toy had some of that. He was born in, say, 1930, so he was of an age where he was brought up with those kinds of ideas. But younger people, I mean, people like this, are in a different world. They're part of a different world. Ugo, is a lawyer. Vini is a linguist. And they're married to Dutch people or whatever. That's inconceivable to someone like Kala or these people. The idea of being, that's not that world. So survival for them, they felt superior to people in the city. They would say, I think I tell in this, something that a man said to me, a man who was in his 60s, so he was born close to 1900. He said to me, when I was young, I went to the city with my mother's brother. So that was in the 1910s or 20s, and some Fotonenge, Creole, Afro-Surinamer, said to him, he cursed him. He said something about his being a savage. And he said, where I live, I shit wherever I want. You have to pay to shit. I drink the purest water in the world. You have to pay for water, and so on. And Samakas felt, I think, until the middle of the century, maybe when we were there, they felt superior to Creoles. And they felt like they had everything. There was no money in the villages. A lot of women had never used money. They didn't know a kwartje from I forget the names of the store, a guild or anything. They talked about kozu. If you had to pay a god, you paid, feifi kozu or whatever. And when someone killed a deer, it was cut up and it was given to everyone, and the head went to the gama. You never paid for anything. So everyone shared everything. Everyone knew about everything. When you woke up in the morning, you went and you said, you asked at every house, sisa, so. People knew everyone who slept where that night and so on and so forth. And with whom, yes. And but there was a community. There was strong social community. When someone was sick, everyone would be concerned about what made them sick. There would be divination. Everyone would be there. There really was a community of a different sort than there is now. And the captains, as people were saying this morning, had authority, both not just political, but spiritual. They were spiritual leaders. They prayed on behalf of everybody, and people cared. And anyone could discipline children, and so on and so forth. So it was a different world.
Right.
And after a while, once consumer society came in and money, and you had to pay if you wanted to buy meat or rice or something, then everything changed. And people realized they were poorer than a lot of the people in the city. And when they went to the city, they lived in worse housing and so on.
So actually the real surviving has started just now.
Yes, it's a different kind of surviving.
Culture. Yeah.
Just a footnote to Rich's remark about the fact that there wasn't money in the villages. Our closest neighbor was Gama Agbago's elder sister. She was in her 90s, and she kept chickens, and she sometimes would sell an egg or even a chicken. And she was once given a kwartje and her grandson explained that 25 cents, this is 25 cents, it's like 2 tinsensi, 1 sensi. And she looked at it and kind of turned it around, and she said, well, which part is the 20, which part is it? I mean, she had no idea.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to ask the audience now if there are pressing questions, and I know there are several.